Hey everybody, welcome to Pioneering Modern, the new hot podcast on the scene where we discuss, well, you guessed it, Pioneer and Modern. Well, we've got two good friends of mine here. We got Scratch down there on the bottom left. What's up, Scratch?
Hello, everything's going good. How about you?
It's going pretty sweet. I get to hang out with you guys for the next couple of little bits, so pretty awesome actually. And down there on the other corner, we've got my good friend JP. What's up, JP?
Hey, how you doing, Anton? You alright?
Yeah, doing pretty awesome today, bud. Doing pretty swell. So last week we talked about how to get into the modern format and a good entry point for that. We also did a little bit of introducing of ourselves and kind of where we're bringing our perspective on this game from. I'm kind of more of our combo mage. Scratch down there is our expert control mage, and JP over there is filling up the mid-range spot for us. So after talking about modern last time, we figured we'd put a little effort into pioneer since we are pioneering modern. And each of us chose a deck that we want to do a little bit of a deeper dive into than we did with the Greentron deck last time. But kind of give you guys a little bit of what we're looking to the Pioneer format from. Got a couple of spicy ones. I'm bringing something a little off top tier to the table. We've got Scratch giving us their wonderful control perspective, and JP's got something that he's been loving and enjoying lately. And so pretty excited to get into that for you.
Absolutely. And of course, all of our deck lists will be shared on our Snake Eyes Entity Twitter handle and on Instagram as well. So the Twitter handle is at snake underscore eyes underscore ntg.
Yep, we got that right over there above Scratch if you guys forget about that. So yeah, we're gonna actually lead off with Scratch talking about what they're bringing to the table today. You gonna go ahead and give us a little lead in before I switch over to it?
So today I'll be talking about Esper Control, which is another one of my another control deck that I like to play. As I've always said, I don't like playing non-blue decks, and it's just a style that I enjoy. It's draw go, which is the saying of just drawing cards and then just passing and only playing at instant speed during your opponent's turn, mainly during their end step in case you're wanting to do something like drawing cards or doing something extra. You usually just wait till their end step, and that way they can't do much about it. And it's just a fun deck to play that basically just is draw go, just concentrated.
All right. Is there any particular spot you want to draw anyone's attention to starting off here?
So yeah, if we have the deck list pulled up now, so we can start talking about the entire deck list. I'd say the most important card within the deck, in my opinion, would be Sphinx's Revelation. If we can
Got
pull that
that.
one up, Sphinx's Revelation is it's not a card that makes you win the game. It doesn't have anything on it that lets you win the game. I know a lot of players like to say that or think that. But the fact is, as soon as you're able to cast Sphinx's Revelations, that draw you 6, 8, 10, 13 cards, which I have done. And I've also once copied a Sphinx's Revelation for 9, I think, so I drew 18 cards and gained 18 life. Just casual hand size of 22, I think it was at the end of turn. This card allows you to gain insane amount of cards advantage. It gives you the life you need to be able to not die. And sometimes, you're already pretty high. Sometimes you're just at 11 life and you go up to 17 life, draw 6 cards, and you do that during your opponent's end step. They're basically done for at that point. You got all the answers in your hand, you got all the life that you would need, and basically at that point you're just getting closer and closer to winning the game. The second card I'd really like to point out would be the Thassa's Intervention, which I like to sometimes Thassa's Intervention, which is why I sometimes like to call this deck 8 Rev occasionally as a joke talking about 8 rack, which is a deck that has a effect that another card shares, so they try to call it 8 rack, so because they have it 8 times. Thassa's Intervention is a weaker version of Sphinx's Revelation if we're going about pure card advantage, but the fact is Thassa's Intervention is kind of your Swiss Army knife in the sense of allowing you to dig deep, find particular cards, and if you're really in a bad situation, you'll just counter something with it. It's like Archmage's Charm in Modern. You either dig for cards or you counter a spell if need be. It's an absolutely awesome card at doing that. And this is the main card advantage you're going, but you're now asking how do you not deck yourself? Now we'll go over to one of my favorite artifacts, Elixir of Immortality. This is your key to immortality. If you're not winning by killing your opponent with a creature or any beatdown plan, you're just winning by decking your opponent. They only have 53 cards in their deck anyways, if they haven't mulliganed. And I mean, it is basically just 53 turns until they deck themselves. It's not that long, you can get that done within about 40 to 45 minutes. So, you just have to win game one. It's very important. The main focus is to just get to a point where you can just cast cast Sphinx's Revelation so big that you just keep drawing Elixir of Immortality and you just keep reshuffling it back in. And because you have to shuffle your graveyard back in to not deck is the reason you cannot ever run a Reliquary Tower in this deck, because you need to discard the hand size, or otherwise you'd easily deck yourself and not be able to cast giant Sphinx's Revelations.
I adore this card. I owe my best tournament finish to this card in combination with Sphinx's Revelation, so I have a wonderful, wonderful relationship with Elixir of Immortality. It's just the way this deck is amazing and awesome, and I love it, I love it, I love it. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you. I just had to sing the praises of Elixir of Immortality.
It's a fun card for one player. The Censor.
Yeah, exactly. One player. Yeah. There we go.
Winning is fun. Let's go over to Censor. There. Censor is one of the more important cards, and a more recent innovation that I have gone upon is in the past I strayed away from Censor, being the fact that Censor does sometimes feel very awkward in a deck that has a very high mana curve of trying to cast Sphinx's Revelation with a huge mana amount. That's why the reason you're always trying to hit a land drop every turn, and you got the 24 lands plus the 3 MBFCs, and you really want to hit your land drops each turn. It felt a bit awkward, but the fact is, you need to have, in this current meta, I feel like you just need to be a little bit more low to the ground, and you need to have early answers. So you need something like Censor, and the recycling is also just very good in order to be able to not have it be a dead draw in the late game. I guess the next important cards would be something like Eliminate, Heartless Act, and Fatal Push. They all have a little bit different text on what kind of cards or what kind of creatures they can kill under what circumstances. But the fact is, you're playing cheap removal spells that hopefully are able to deal with your opponent's threats. In the fact that you're able to deal with them very efficiently and trying to deal with them at instant speed, allowing you to just go with the draw-go strategy of just draw a card, play land, pass the turn, and then just deal with any kind of threats your opponent throws at you. And in order to do that, you need early answers that are cheap while still being effective.
So why do you play like the different? Why not have them all, for example, be 4 copies of Eliminate, or 4 copies of Heartless Act?
The problem is, if I were to go for a 4 of 1 removal spell, I'd most likely go for something like Heartless Act that is just very versatile in the sense of it kills everything that has no counters on it, which is most creatures in the format. It sometimes doesn't kill something, but the fact is you want 1 mana removal spells, but you don't always get everything with a 1 mana removal spell, so Fatal Push doesn't kill everything in the format. It only kills a Winota if you have Revolt active, so it's the reason I tended to only stick to 2, maybe if you need, if the meta calls for it to go up to 3, maybe 4. But that's why I tended to go down on it. Eliminate is the fact is you have a lot of 3 mana Planeswalkers running around that you also want to hit with it, so it's the ability to hit Planeswalkers at 3 mana while it's hitting also low costed creatures. That allows Eliminate to be a very efficient answer that deals with a lot of your opponent's threats. And another one of the answers, and at the same time a threat, if you want to call it, is Murderous Rider, which is basically has the text of Hero's Downfall and the meaning of destroying creatures and planeswalkers, costing you some life. Not a big deal because it's at the end of the day you can also cast it off its adventure for a 2/3 lifelinker that puts itself back on the bottom of the library if it dies. It's not efficient, but it's versatile, which makes it super good. Now let's talk about the sweepers. I chose to run 3 Supreme Verdicts. Very simple. Destroy all creatures, can't be countered. It's just a great way of dealing with your opponent's board state. And then that's also the Planeswalker of my choice. I chose to not run Teferi because you need to have more answers if you're trying to just play lands and answers and then get into Sphinx's Revelation, so I chose not to run 5-mana Teferi. I instead chose to run the Wandering Emperor, which is a removal spell and a win con and a flash threat, meaning, just like I said, Drago, it allows you to play Drago, just an awesome card. The split between Absorb and Dissolve is just so you can have a general answer that deals with any kind of spell that you need to. Dissolve is much more preferable in the late game due to the Scry effect. Absorb is just much more nicer against kind of aggro decks. So the split is, you could go with double Absorb, you could go with a 1-1 split, you could go with double Dissolve. I usually would say to at least run one Absorb, but yeah, that's also your own choice. Solundi Vision is another card that I like to mention. It's a one-of. It's another way to add more lands whilst in the late game being able to find you cards. So it's like a great way of just being able to dig deep for specific instants and sorceries because the deck is basically just instants and sorceries, whilst at the same time being a land if need be. Dovin's Veto is a efficient way also to deal with. Like I said, all the deck is trying to do is efficiently answer targeted things, so it's able to deal with the non-creature spell. And then let's talk about the 2 last cards in it is Quicken. Quicken is one of my favorite cantrips. I know a lot of players dislike Quicken, but the matter of the fact is Quicken allows you to play something like Emiria's Call, which is another one of those MBFCs, at instant speed. Being able to let the Drago can strategy play much better. It draws you a card. It's like it does for 1 mana to draw you a card. Not something that you should ever be mad about. And it just allows some of the sorceries in the sideboard or something like Supreme Verdict to just be played at instant speed, which is just very, very good. Now, the final card that I want to talk about in the main board, also, excluding the lands, is Shark Typhoon. And this is a very interesting one. First of all, it's a threat. It is a very dangerous threat, but hard cast. It is a cycling. It has the ability to cycle. So on turn 2, if you don't have enough lands, you can cycle it for just 2 mana, X is 0, just dig for lands. Absolutely, just a valuable strategy. But let's now go on to something more. Just talking about the main board. Let's go about a little bit more technical play. If we were to talk about Fatal Push. Fatal Push has the text of Revolt. If a permanent you control leaves the battlefield, you have very little permanents that can leave the battlefield. One would be a Shark token dying, a Wandering Emperor token dying, a Miria's Call token dying, a Fabled Passage leaving the battlefield, or the Elixir of Immortality leaving the battlefield. But, fetching with the Fabled Passage to then have a active Revolt on Fatal Push is something everyone knows about, but the more interesting part is, if you cycle Shark Typhoon for X is equal to 0 on purpose, your Shark gets made is a 0/0 and instantly dies, triggering Revolt. No matter what happens, that Shark token will activate Revolt because it left the battlefield. It does not matter if there's a rest in peace on the battlefield, it just has to leave the battlefield no matter what happened. So, if you need to hit a Fatal Push on a creature with 4 power, with a CMC 4, you can cycle a Shark Typhoon for 0, and then cast a Fatal Push to get something like Winota off the battlefield.
I like that. That is a nice little piece of tech that I hadn't thought of personally. So I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Alex from the Pioneer, Pioneer Perspective, who told me about that. So I didn't know about it either. It's something that you learn, and it's very, very spicy and good to know. I think the mana base is quite self-explanatory, so we could say I guess Cling to Dust you could also say. Cling to Dust is a nice way of answering Phoenix whilst also having more card draw in the main board and life gain, which is always good. But if we were to go about the sideboard, because I think like the mana base, in my opinion, would be quite self-explanatory. Is the sideboard I chose is it's the fact that Narcissus Reversal is a nice way of dealing with something like Lotus Combo when they try to go for Thought Distortion. In a control game, it's very good to just Sphinx's Revelation. They Dovin's Veto your Sphinx's Revelation, and they're like, haha, I can't be countered. And then you just say Narcissus Reversal my own Sphinx's Revelation, get the Sphinx's Revelation back in hand, cast the copy, and then get all the cards drawn from it, and you just annihilate their Dovin's Veto. Very good tech, won me a game before.
That
Um,
sounds so good. You still have your Sphinx's Rev too. That is, oh
Yeah.
jeez.
What's also relatively relevant with this one is a card that's currently people are eyeing it up as the next card that might see the ban hammer is Temporal Trespass. Temporal Trespass is a delve spell. I think it's 8 and blue.
triple.
And it's take another turn. It's just taken the next turn after this one. And this Narcissus Reversal can copy um, the Temporal Trespass.
So you still get your extra turn, but you also still have Temporal Trespass to fire off
Yeah.
again if you need. That's tricky. I like this card a lot more in Pioneer than I have in any other format.
It's kind of like a revamped sideboard. I like it. I mean, Mystical Dispute is a great way of dealing with any kind of blue decks, which I also am running. You know, hates on spirits and stuff. It's a very good card. Um, so let's also talk about something. The summary dismissal is my way of dealing with the if they were to go for multiple extra turns by galvanic iteration into trespass. With summary dismissal, you can clear the stack. If your opponent's got any kind of uncounterable threat, clear it. Emrakul might come up. Emrakul, the promised end, is a
Mm-hmm.
great way of dealing with it. Um, the Aether Gust is also a choice here to, deal with Winota, deal with any kind of aggro decks. It's a great way of dealing with red and green permanents, while it's being efficiently costed to just put it back on top. It's not perfect to have it on top, but sometimes putting on top is just what you need to buy you an extra turn to then cast huge Sphinx's Revelation and just turn the game around.
Kind of
Sort
ties into our conversation last podcast about subtlety and how sometimes putting that card on top is actually a trap.
yeah. If you know what you're dealing with the next turn, you can just set up your hand and have the perfect answer for whatever's coming. So it's just more information, and information is key. Um, let's talk about the win cons in the sideboard. One would be Ashiok Dream Render. It sounds weird as a win con, but this deck grinds late game. If you mill your opponent for 20 cards, that is not one. It has not won you the game, but it is pretty close to winning you the game. It's a great way of hating on graveyards. It doesn't really do much about stopping fetches because you don't see a lot of fetches in the format, but the fact that it can hate on graveyards while it's at the same time also basically killing your opponent's library is just a great way of being able to stop your deal with your opponent. Also, a very interesting tech about Ashiok, it only exiles opponent's graveyards. You can mill yourself in case you have something like a Delve spell. This is like about any other deck wanting to play it. So you can mill 4 cards of your graveyard and then exile all other graveyards, all opponent's graveyards, and this would allow you to maybe like mill enough cards to be able to cast something like Dig Through Time, which is the deck is not playing, but in case you're wanting more tech to know, that is also a very interesting one that you can know about in the future. And let's talk about Approach of the Second Sun. This happens in case you ever were to lose game 1 and it is a timed event and you need to hurry up. This is not the fastest win con, but one of the more interesting ones you can do is easily quicken into it during your opponent's end step, and then just dig deep for it by casting a Salandi Vision. If you were to cast a Narcissus Reversal on it, which is possible because it does not matter if the spell resolved as like it's an original one. It says if it was cast from your hand,
Mm-hmm.
and you cast it the first time. It doesn't have to resolve the first time,
No.
and the copy doesn't do much, but it doesn't matter. what you're doing is you're setting it, putting it back in your hand, and the following turn you were to recast it, you instantly win the game.
Yep.
Which is a fun tech against control.
Love that little bit of info. Narset's reversal is growing on me quite a bit in this little conversation.
It's got a lot of spice. It's very very good. One I'd say is Sorcerer's Spyglass. This is one to hate on any kind of like activations that you need to hate out, like planeswalkers or anything else. It's not the perfect answer, but it's one I like to deal to have in order to deal with something that they have as a like activated ability that I need to stop from them to be able to activate. So it's a great way to deal with that. Devout Decree is a great way of dealing with kind of like Phoenix or mono black aggro kind of decks that have like a bunch of just recurring threats, or also against Burn. Not a bad one to play bringing against Burn. Deals with planeswalkers as well, and Scry 1 is always a good one. Final card is Dovin's Veto, which is another way to hate against control, hate against kind of like those combo decks, any kind of like non-creature based decks. Overall, this is like a deck that is trying to efficiently deal with things, and sometimes you got to get a little bit creative with the deck, in my opinion, in order to fully be able to get the max out of it. And the more instant speed you can go, the better. I forgot about Thought Distortion.
Yeah, I was about to say, did we mention Thought Distortion?
Did not mention Thought Distortion. Okay, if you want to have some real fun with Thought Distortion, upkeep, cast Quicken. Your opponent never suspects the draw step distortion if you upkeep Quicken. They will always be like, why did you Quicken in my upkeep? But it doesn't stop. So you Quicken upkeep, and they let it resolve. You're at, you have 7 mana, 6 mana on tap now. You let them draw their card, and before main phase, you go to the first main phase, you cast Thought Distortion. Game over. At that point, you have won against like almost every non-creature deck because their hand is nothing, their battlefield is their graveyard is nothing, and they have drawn their card for the turn, which also was nothing unless it was a land. So in this case, Thought Distortion is just able to just destroy your opponent at instant speed, which makes Quicken so much fun to play with it.
That's just disrespectful. Awesome. So that's what you're attacking the Pioneer format from?
Yeah, that's the one that I'm looking to attack the Pioneer format with. It's a homebrew of mine, and I'm looking to see how well it will take me. And yeah, this is my way of beating the format.
Nice. I liked a good number of the selections. I liked how you've got a couple of different one-ofs and how you've split your answers to, kind of hone in on what the format's trying to do, answering like your 3-mana planeswalkers with eliminates, but still making sure you've got your fatal pushes and your heartless acts for the creatures. Just everything it looks like is geared towards getting to that Sphinx's Revelation set up and that final couple of turns where you land your win condition or put the end phase into action.
One card that I would recommend actually scratch for this one is Fateful Absence. It's a 1 white and 1 generic. Destroy target creature or planeswalker that the owner of that permanent creates a clue token.
Yeah.
I have heard people talk about that, and I think it's a good card. But the fact is, this is for blue-white, one of the more important cards that they can play, and I absolutely agree it's a good card for blue-white. The important part, though, is you are playing, if you were watching Esper Control in Modern, they didn't play, this was before MH2, by the way, in case, they didn't play something like Path to Exile, they played Fatal Push because it was just a better card. And I feel like a lot of this black removal spell might be a little bit more situational, but the fact that it is a little bit more situational just makes it be it's just more efficient, it deals with the threats better, and then it usually doesn't give you a card disadvantage, which the Fateful Absence absolutely does, and which was the reason why I chose to not run Fateful Absence in this Esper list.
It's really close, though. I'm a fan of Fateful Absence, but I can definitely see how the extra clue token and them being able to draw a card eventually to replace whatever you destroyed being a little skeptical.
Yeah, I guess as a mid-range player myself, Fateful Absence is better in that kind of shell because you have ways to kill your opponent.
because you can.
Before the clue token becomes relevant.
This is one very, very important part about it. If you're going through the struggle of making an Esper mana base, because your mana base gets worse by playing more colors. If you can just run all islands and just run mono blue, you're not going to struggle with finding the colors that you need. If you're going through the struggle of adding to Esper, I definitely think it is better to then use this increase or this better these better removal spells that have been granted to you by the fact that you've decided to be able to say, hey, I'll draw like 1 in 100 games. My mana will not come together, but because I gave up that, I'm looking for better, more efficient removal. That's the trade-off of playing Esper.
Yeah, and we did just get the Rephine's Tower as well to help out with that mana base.
Oh yeah.
So we're not really getting punished that much for going into the third color. We get access to a little bit extra sideboard stuff through Thought Distortion, and not giving our opponent a clue when we may not be able to get to a point of closure before that, that extra card matters. So playing the black spells definitely kind of shuts that door. And Cling to Dust is not to be overlooked, especially in a format where Phoenix is so dominant.
And Croxa.
Oh, and Croxa. That card. Whew. Making waves in Modern is kind of a Death Shadow finisher as well.
Yeah, it's the reason why this deck is running something like Ashiok Dream Render as well, which allows you to just be able to deal with the Croxa from the graveyard. A lot of those decks that have like Phoenix, like Phoenix and others, because they mill themselves. Like if you completely get all 20 cards with the Ashiok, they are basically toast because they just mill themselves too much. Let's let Joe talk about his deck.
Yeah, Joe, you want to give us a little lead in while I get set up on getting that set there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my deck of choice was an interesting one. It's a rogues list, but this one is it's based on the current meta deck that is just rogues. Um, However, the meta version it generally only runs the rogue creatures. Rather than what this one does, which is it runs ninjas and rogues. And for me, ninjas have always been quite a close creature type to my heart. Um, when I first started playing EDH, one of the first decks that I built was Yuriko, um, Tiger Shadow, and it's basically it's a ninja deck, and I've always loved the mechanic ninjutsu. So let's start by taking a look at Moon Circuit Hacker.
All right. There we go.
Moon Circuit Hacker, it's a new card from not the most recent, but it's from Neon Dynasty. It's basically a new version of Ninja of the Deep Hours. So it's got ninjutsu 1 blue, and it basically what you can do is whenever a creature is unblocked, you can ninjutsu in this creature. It will come in tapped and attacking. So the plan for this deck is it's a tempo deck, really. The plan for this deck is to keep the pressure on your opponent, but being able to do everything at instant speed, or do lots of things at instant speed, which makes it a lot more difficult to interact with. So this is an example of the ninjutsu mechanic. So whenever it deals damage, you can draw a card. But if you do, discard a card unless Moon Circuit Hacker entered the battlefield this turn. So if you ninjutsu it in, you get pure card advantage. If it didn't come in this turn, then it's a loot, which is still good, in my opinion.
Yeah, I like how it's just like a little smaller, like you mentioned, Ninja the Deep Hours.
Yeah, that's right. It's not quite as good, but almost. It's effectively as good
Hmm.
in terms of how useful it is. It's as good.
Oh yeah.
You know, but yeah. So well, let's start off with the ninjas. So we've got Moontoke Hacker. The next one for us to look at is Biting Palm Ninja. Now, this is another one new from Dynasty, and it's a really good one, actually. I really like this because, so Biting Palm Ninja, it's black and 2, generic, and it's got a ninjutsu cost of the same, so black and 2 generic. But when it enters the battlefield, it gets a menace counter. Now, menace obviously means it can only be blocked by 2 or more creatures. So even when it comes in, it's got some evasion, which is very useful. Now, whenever it deals combat damage to the player, you can remove the menace counter, and if you do, that player reveals their hand, and I can basically it's a thought seize effect. Uh, and but instead of it going to the graveyard, it can go to exile. So you can get rid of that pesky Croxer in their hand. Okay, so these are the two ninjas in the deck. There is one more that is it's not ninjutsu, but it is effectively ninjutsu. So let's take a look at Zarasan. So this is a big beta, and this one I've won quite a few. I've had quite a few scoops to this one connecting. Um, it's got flash. It's a 5 mana creature with flash, but it has an ability. You pay blue, black, and 2 generic to return an unblocked attacking rogue you control to its owner's hand. Put Zarasan uh, from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. And the effect is when it deals combat damage to a player, I can put target permanent from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Now, the important thing is with this one is for this one to be really good, the opponent has to have cards in the graveyard. Now, generally speaking, in Pioneer, it's not so easy to do that. There are no fetches. There's less. It's not as fast. So this deck it needs to find ways to slowly but surely mill your opponent. Um, Now, if we go to the rogues, now let's look at the rogues section of this deck. So let's look at Merfolk Windrobber. So Merfolk Windrobber, this is a 1-drop. It's got flying, so it's got evasion, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player mills a card. And it also has some late game utility because it can cycle. If your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. Now, so again, we're looking here. This is a fantastic ninjutsu target, of course, but we have a mill theme in the deck. However, it's not milling to win in the same way as Scratch's deck is. It's milling, slowly, but just to synergize the rest of the deck. So we have 2 main creatures to mill our opponents. The first one is Thieves Guild Enforcer. Now this one is it's probably my favorite card in the deck. It's a 1/1 flash for 1 black. Whenever it enters the battlefield or another rogue enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent mills 2 cards. So when it comes down, instantly you are putting cards into your opponent's graveyard. And again, if other rogues come in, so for example, Merfolk Windrobber, then that also mills your opponent for 2. Now, when your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, Thieves Guild Enforcer actually gets a boost. It gets +2, +1, and it gets Death Touch. So you don't want to be blocking this one unless you have to. So that brings us on to the other rogue in the deck, which is Soaring Thought Thief. Now, again, a similar effect with this one. It mills your opponent for 2. However, it's not when it enters the battlefield. It's whenever a rogue attacks. Whenever one or more rogues attack, each opponent mills 2 cards. Now, it's a 1/3, so it is quite a good blocker. And especially with Flash, you can really mess up people's attack step with this one. Now, the important thing with this one is that you can use it to, because it's got flying as well, it's very nice. It's a nice synergy with ninjutsu because you can attack with it, mill your opponent, and then ninjutsu it out. And it works really, really well for that. Now, in fact, I've just realized that there is a ninja that I've missed that can be quite useful in this situation. Silver Fur Master. I do apologize. This one is another ninja. It's ninjutsu for blue and a black, and the main cost for it is also blue and a black. This gives your other ninja and rogue creatures +1/+1. It also says that ninjutsu abilities you activate cost 1 less to activate. However, I've found that it's not super relevant when it comes to this one, but it does pump your other creatures very nicely. Now, the Thought Thief does the same thing for rogues. So if we look at the Thought Thief, whenever, as long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, rogues you control get +1/+0. So you can imagine having a Thieves Guild Enforcer, a Silver Fur Master, and a Soaring Thought Thief on the battlefield, which is perfectly possible. It basically makes your Thieves Guild Enforcer go from being a 3/2 if they have 8 cards in their graveyard to a 5/3, no problem, and that's a 1-drop. So it's a very nice way of pumping your other creatures.
Build your own Tomberlife there.
Yeah, it is. Now, and also, there is a Planeswalker in this deck, and it's very, very nice. Kaito, it is just pure card advantage. In grinding matchups, this one it has won me several matches just by being able to slam it down on turn 3. So it basically says at the beginning of your at the beginning of your end step, if it entered the battlefield this turn, it phases out. Now, let's look at the first ability, the first loyalty ability, the +1. So draw a card, then discard a card unless you attacked this turn. Now, obviously, we have lots of creatures. They are all going to be, chances are they're going to be attacking. We want to kill them as fast as we can. So generally speaking, you are just going to be +1, draw a card, and then it phases out, and your opponent can't attack it the next turn. So this is just pure card advantage, and it's a really good way of making sure that you keep getting cards in your hand. So there's one more rogue that I'd like to talk about, and that's Brazen Borrower. Brazen Borrower, if you play Modern, you'll know about this one. It's some extra interaction when you need it, but it's also just a 3/1 beta. And again, if Soaring Thought Thief and Silver Fur Master are on the board, you know, it can get even bigger. Now, bear in mind that if you have 2 Soaring Thought Thieves on the board, this turns into a 5/1, you know, a 5/1 creature. So you know it can really, you know, hit hard. So and now there is one last card that I'd like us to look at. It's Into the Story. So Into the Story, this goes absolutely fantastic in this deck. You are obviously going to be milling your opponent, and it's very easy to get 7 of their cards into their graveyard. And this basically just says instant speed, pay 4 mana, draw 4 cards. And this has really, really gotten me out of a lot of tight spots, because you get yourself to a position where you've got no cards in hand, and let's say, you know, you need to keep the pressure on. If you have this in hand, it's just so easy to just refill your hand really easily. Now there is a removal package in this deck, and that is in the form of Fatal Push. Now, unlike the control deck, this is a little bit tighter on mana. So the most efficient threats are the only ones that will do. The most efficient removal spells are the only ones that will do. Fatal Push is very useful here. Now, also, one thing to remember is that the ninjutsu effect, it also triggers Revolt. So whenever you ninjutsu in a Moon Circuit hacker, instantly that triggers Revolt, because the creature left the battlefield. So it's quite easy to trigger that effect. So it's a good card to have in the deck.
That's a really good mention that you brought up with the ninjutsu, because at first glance, that's not something that normally would be thought of as a way to trigger Revolt. So,
absolutely, yeah. And it really does come in useful. Now, the last one is, it's a counter spell, and it's a removal spell. And I'll be honest, I think that this card is probably the best counter spell. It's a better counter spell, in my opinion. It's Drown in the Lock. Now, choose one. Counter target spell with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. Destroy, or you can choose destroy target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. So this basically, we are already milling our opponent. This is basically just a 2 mana kill target creature, 2 mana counter target spell, no strings attached. And it's just a very good card to have in the deck. So this is the main board. Now, as for the land spread, Hive of the Eye Tyrant and Mutavault, these are very nice cards to have. Especially Mutavault, it has all creature types. So it becomes a ninja and a rogue. So if you activate it while Soaring Thought Thief or Silver Fur Master is on the board, it gets all the bells and whistles from those effects. So that's quite a nice one to have. Of course, Otawara, Takenuma, both very useful in this deck as well. Nice bits of interaction. And that's the main board, really.
Joe, I have a small question.
Yeah.
The Fatal Push, do you know if phasing out counts as leaving the battlefield?
That's a really good question. I
don't believe it does.
No.
Because I think phasing has been one of those weird ones.
I mean, you should maybe look that up, because that could maybe also be a very interesting way to trigger Revolt in your end step.
if you're watching this and you know the answer to this one, we don't. So please let us know. Send us a tweet or let us know on Instagram. And yeah, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Comment below. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at the sideboard very quickly now. In Scratch's sideboard, he had a couple of Ethagust, but it's even better in this deck. You know, for me, this isn't a put target spell or permanent that's red or green on top of an opponent's library. This is just a straight out counter spell, because I can put it on someone's the top of someone's library if they really want me to, and then I can just go, okay, I will then cast a Thieves Guild Enforcer and mill it straight off the top before you can draw it again. So it's a really nice card to have against decks like Winota. So then let's go to the next one. So we're going to look at Mystical Dispute. This is an easy one. Just a very efficient counter spell that's very nice against control, against spirits. You know, it does it fills a hole when, say, for example, let's say Fatal Push isn't very useful against control. It's just a straight switch. So we have Blood Chief's Thirst at the top. So again, this is a simple one, really. If you're against creature heavy decks, or if you're against the red deck with Chandra, either the 3 mana or 4 mana one, this is a nice card to have to get rid of anything that your creatures can't beat. So then let's have a look down. So Crypt Incursion. This one I added recently. It's very good against Phoenix. Yeah, I found that being instant speed, it just ruins Phoenix. It really does. And also it, against any aggressive decks, it just does an absolute brilliant job because, again, you are milling your opponent, you have lots of interaction, so Fatal Push, Drown the Lock, and so you are constantly putting cards into your opponent's graveyard, and so this is just basically very often pay 3, gain 6, 9 life, very often, so it's just really nice to have. Another one, so against creature decks as well, we have 2 cards that are very useful. We have Nighthawk Scavenger. Now, this is just a really good card to have against creatures. Flying, Death Touch, Lifelink, all really good things to have against aggressive decks. Nighthawk's power is equal to 1 plus the number of card types among cards in your opponent's graveyard. Again, generally speaking, it comes in as a 1/3, but then all of a sudden, when you've got like 9, 10 cards in your opponent's graveyards, that goes up quite a lot. So it's just a really good card to have against creature decks. Then the absolute beast that is Kalitas. Kalitas is just it's a wonderful deck, a wonderful card against creature decks, but also against Phoenix. It's actually just a rest in peace against decks like Phoenix, because if a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, instead exile that card and create a 2/2. So you kill their Phoenix and it doesn't go to the graveyard, it goes into exile. So it's a really nice one to have. Then we have 2 copies of Crippling Fear. I've mixed and matched between a card called Witch's Vengeance, but
yeah.
I do quite like this one, just because generally speaking, Witch's Vengeance, it's not always, the Witch's Vengeance, it needs all of your opponent's creatures to be the same type to be really good. and generally speaking, if you have a board state where it's all of your um, ninjas, or if it's all of your rogues, you can just choose whichever one you've got the most of. So I just prefer this one. Then we also have 2 copies of Grafdigger's Cage. Now, again, this one is just very good against Winota and also against Phoenix. It's just a catch-all. Oh, and it's also very good against collected company decks, which are a thing in Pioneer. I've seen humans. They, instead of running Etherval like they do in the modern version, they run Coco instead. So this is good against Coco. But there we have it. Now, there is one card I'd like to give an honourable mention to, and that is Tyrant's Scorn. This, I personally I ended up cutting it in the end, but I thought I'd at least mention it just because it is a card. It can do things, depending on your meta. It's a very efficient, removal spell. So if you find that it's more useful to you than the 4th Drown in the Lock, say, or the 4th Fatal Push, then go ahead. It's definitely a decent card. But yeah, so that's my deck.
Yeah, all right. So this looks like a really strong contender in the format. It can apply pressure, can disrupt the opponent's game plan at the same time. It's got combat tricks. It's got a little bit of everything. I can definitely see how this would be super appealing to attack the format from.
Originally, I only played. I played the rogues list, which is just rogues, and instead of the ninjas, it ran stuff like 4 copies of Thoughtseize, 4 copies of Consider, and extra card draw spells like Dig Through Time and Into the Story. Okay. It also ran 4 copies of the card that's banned in every format except Pioneer, Deathrite Shaman.
Deathrite Shaman.
Yeah, and the thing is, and it's great, it's a good deck, I do like it, but it's more controlling. It's got more of a control feel to it. You're not attacking as much, or there's less pressure to put on your opponent, because you've only got in that deck, you've got the Thieves Guild Enforcers, the Soaring Thought Thieves, and the Deathrite Shamans. Everything else, I think they've got some Brazen Borrowers in the sideboard as well, but the rest of it isn't there. So I preferred this version just because I like you know me, I'm more of an aggressive player. I like my mid-range strategies more than I like my control strategies. So for me, I just prefer this version.
Sometimes the players, you can hand every player a burn deck, and I think every player will find a decent value of success playing a burn deck. But the fact is, some players might not, put the time in, or want to put the time in to get good with the deck, or find all the small technicalities. So not every deck is for every player, and finding the deck that makes you want to get better with it is the best way of getting good with it, because it's not just about playing the best deck, it's just playing the deck to its best ability. It's also very important part.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And you both have showcased your strengths in the Magic the Gathering department by bringing us your Esper Control list, Scratch, and your Dimir Ninja Rogues list, JP. So I'm going to lean into one of my strengths, the old combo action, and bring you my list for today, and that is the Hidden Strings Lotus Field Combo deck. Whereas both JP and Scratch started on their spells and then came back to mention the mana base, the most important part of this deck is the mana base. So we'll start there with the namesake card of Lotus Field. This card has hexproof. When it enters the battlefield, it comes in tapped, and you have to sacrifice 2 lands. For all of that downside, you do get to tap it to add 3 mana of any one color to your mana pool. So the idea is to get this Lotus Field onto the battlefield as quickly as possible, then use this card, Thespian Stage. Normally taps to add for a generic or a colorless. Then you could pay 2 and tap it to make it a copy of a target land, except it still has the ability to copy a land. So essentially we get 2 Lotus Fields on the battlefield as quickly as possible, and then cast cards like Hidden Strings to untap or tap target permanent, then tap or untap another target permanent. Cipher is, then you may exile this card encoded onto a creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of the encoded card without paying its mana cost. That section of the card is pretty much irrelevant, but can come up in some super corner cases. So since we are so focused on that as our mana engine, we have to put a little effort into, 1, getting our lands onto the battlefield as quickly as possible, and 2, making sure that we have the correct lands. Lotus Field is super important, Thespian Stage is super important. So to do that, we're employing Arboreal Grazer as a accelerant. 0/3 reach for a green mana. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you can put a land from your hand into the battlefield tapped. So that puts us on 2 lands on turn 1, giving us the opportunity to put Lotus Field onto the battlefield on turn 2. And I don't know about you guys, turn 2 is a little earlier than turn 3. So that sounds pretty sweet to me.
I fully appreciate it.
So to make sure that we have Lotus Field or Thespian Stage whenever we need it, we are using Sylvan Scrying. Now, if y'all saw the last podcast we put out, you know that Sylvan Scrying is very important to the Tron mana base as well. Making sure you get the right land at the right time for these kinds of decks is really important, because that is how we're going to fuel how we end the game. Getting into that, we're going to be casting this card, Emergent Ultimatum. Came into popularity in Standard during its time. You can search your library for up to 3 mono-colored cards with different names and exile them. An opponent chooses one of those cards. You shuffle that one card into your library. You may cast the other cards without paying their mana costs. Then you exile Emergent Ultimatum. So essentially what you want to do is you want to get Omniscience, you want to get Behold the Beyond, and you want to get either Fae of Wishes or Mastermind's Acquisition. Essentially, you're trying to set up a game position where you go get Approach of the Second Sons out of your sideboard with either Mastermind's Acquisition or Granted from Fae of Wishes, and then you cast that 2 times to win the game. So to generate the mana we're going to need to be able to cast Emergent Ultimatum and then Approach of the Second Sons, we either need to make sure Omniscience is one of the cards that our opponent allows us to keep with Emergent Ultimatum, or we need to make sure we've generated enough mana with Lotus Field and Hidden Strings. To help that out a little bit more, we've got Vizier of the Tumbling Sands as another untap effect. For a blue and 2 generic, a 1/3 human cleric has the ability of tap, untap another target permanent. It also, however, has Cycling for a blue and a generic to discard this card and draw a card. It triggers an untapped target permanent whenever that happens. So that's another little way we can get our Lotus Field untapped to get that extra mana flow going. How do we make sure we see all these cards, you say? Well, there's a shimmer of possibility that we're going to dig for it with this card. Thought you might like that one.
It was absolutely good.
So we look at the top 4 cards of our library and put one of them into our hand and the rest on the bottom of our library in a random order. That's kind of how we're grinding through our deck, churning through, making sure that we're hitting the right stuff. We can also cycle Vizier to draw a card. But my favorite thing to do, this is probably my favorite card in the deck because it fills both the untap effect and the card searching effect, and that is Pore Over the Pages. 2 blue, 3 generic, you get to draw 3 cards, untap 2 lands, and then discard a card. I love that it's worded particularly this way, so that you get to see the 3 cards before you decide which lands you untap, before you have to discard a card. So you're getting more information, and then you're executing your plan based on that information. The design of this card is just absolutely lovely.
Yeah, I can see how it can be useful. Yeah.
We also have Dark Petition, 2 copies of that. Black, 3 generic, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. If you have 2 or more instants or sorceries in your graveyard, you get to add 3 black mana. So not only does this card get to go grab whatever you're missing, it also gets to add a little fuel to the fire to keep you going.
So how often is that? How often do you have 2? No.
Oh, very, very often. Shimmer of Possibility goes to the graveyard pretty often. We often have a Hidden Strings there as well. Sylvan Scrying, yep, absolutely. I haven't mentioned Balaged Recovery yet. Yep. Oftentimes, especially with Pore Over the Pages, you'll have to discard a card that you may not want to discard. Also, Lotus Field puts lands into the graveyard, so sometimes you're running a little light. This card can either act as an actual land, being a double-faced card, or it can give you the Thespian Stage, or the Botanical Sanctum, or the Boseiju Who Endures that you had to sacrifice to make sure Lotus Field came into play. And it's also not limited to lands. If you need that extra Hidden Strings, or you cast your Fae of Wishes as a creature because you needed combat action, and now you need it to go into your sideboard for your win condition, boom, Balaged Recovery's got you covered. Let's see, what else is worth mentioning in the deck? The mana base, we covered the main parts of it, but we do have Boseiju and Otawara from the new set. One land that has absolutely been amazing in this deck is Blast Zone. Since we're very focused on executing our game plan, we don't have a whole lot of time or resources in the deck dedicated to interaction. And sometimes we just get got because our opponent produces an unwinnable board state. In comes Blast Zone. Most of the times, to buy enough time, the 1 counter will do. It's also very convenient that Blast Zone costs 3 in tap to sacrifice because our Lotus Field produces exactly 3 mana of any one color. So this coming down on turn 3 if we've accelerated, or turn 4 if we haven't, to clean up any sort of mess to get us to turn 5 and on into the end game is super important. I think the only thing I haven't mentioned so far is Leer. Leer kind of fills the role of Underworld Breach, which we no longer have access to in this format. That's how this deck used to grind to the end, was just casting Hidden Strings, get Underworld Breach and Tome Scour loop going so that you just have infinite mana. Well, near infinite mana. But since we don't have Breach anymore in the format, we turn to Leer, which is a little more expensive, but not only does it give us access to our graveyard, it also means spells can't be countered. We can push our Emergent Ultimatum through that control deck. We can make sure Behold the Beyond gets us the exact 3 cards we need to win the game. Can also protect our Approach of the Second Sun whenever we finally get that rolling. So Leer being a fairly recent addition to this deck as a way to kind of keep it alive and relevant. I think that pretty much covers the main deck. I touched on Fae of Wishes and Mastermind's Acquisition being amazing cards and the main way we get into our sideboard to finish the game. Alright, yeah, we'll just move on to the sideboard then. So, as I mentioned, Approach of the Second Sun. Scratch mentioned it in their control deck breakdown as a way to close out the game when the time is ticking. Just cast this twice, you win the game. The first one doesn't have to resolve, the second one does. So keep that in mind when you're playing. Also, something that came up to me, you have to cast it from your hand. With Lear in the deck, it's awfully tempting to look at that Approach of the Second Sun once it's been countered or something and be like, oh yeah, I'll just cast it from my graveyard and win the game. Nope. Definitely lost a game like that.
I have to say one very important thing, though. You can cast the first copy not from your hand. The second copy has to be cast from your hand.
Yep, excellent point.
Could come up in some niche cases.
That is an excellent point. But Approach of the Second Sun is... Sorry?
If you were to flash this back with Leia, surely it gets exiled, doesn't it?
Yeah, I actually tried to, granted, I even also tried to Mastermind's acquisition for my flashback exiled Approach of the Second Sun, and Magic Online did not give me access to them.
No, it's on
Right.
Card Great Creator it says exile as well, and I completely messed that up. That
Yeah.
was a card that had that text. Sorry.
Yeah, the subtle wording of you own from outside the game versus exile definitely is a potential for a trap. So definitely keep your mind on that while you're playing this. Approach of the Second Sun is your main win condition, but we aren't completely without other ones. We have Sphinx of the Final Word. This big beefy boy can definitely do some work for you. We've got blue 5 generic for a 5/5 flying hexproof. This spell can't be countered. And if all of that text wasn't attractive enough, it's also got instant and sorcery spells you control can't be countered. So big beefy boy comes in. You can't touch him. He's a 5/5. He's going to close out the game. And maybe I ended up being able to pull off the combo the turn after I put this onto the battlefield. Your opponent can't interact with it counterspell-wise because your instants and sorceries no longer can be countered. So excellent way to kind of, one, close out the game, or two, protect you from your opponent's interaction. On top of Sphinx of the Final Word, we also have Ugin the Spirit Dragon as a potential finisher. Also really valuable for its middle ability of -X, exile each permanent with mana value X or less that is one or more colors. Very important that it doesn't exile colorless permanents. Just something to keep in mind. But it also does have the +2, 3 damage to a target, which is generally how we're going to close out the game if this is the route we're taking. Let's see what's next. We've got March of the Swirling Mist. Up to X target creatures phases out. It's part of the March cycle, so it has the exile cards from your hand that match the color. It costs 2 less for each card exiled that way. This protects your Lear, protects your Vizier if you need it to, or can act as a fog of sorts to be able to buy a turn or two from your opponent's battlefield. Again, since we don't have a whole lot of interaction in the main deck for that sort of thing, we kind of have to look to the sideboard or use Arboreal Grazer to gum up the battlefield to buy enough time. We have Thought Distortion as well. Scratch brought that up in their deck tech for their Esper Control sideboard. Kind of fills a very similar situation here. Just making sure that our opponent doesn't have anything left to stop us from doing what we're trying to do. Control decks are very good at interacting with this deck and pulling that off. So we want to put something out here like Thought Distortion that can't be countered, that completely takes every possible interaction point away from them. Mentioning creatures, we have Path of Peril. This is kind of our main answer to the battlefield. For black and a generic, we get to destroy all creatures with mana value 2 or less. But this card also has the Cleave ability, so if we cast it for a black, and 4 generic, we just get to destroy all creatures. A lot of the creatures we're trying to deal with within the time frame that we're trying to combo off are going to cost 2 or less. So we're not often cleaving, but it does come up occasionally.
I've never seen this card before. That's Yeah.
Let's see.
I-
It was from...
It's from Midnight Hunt. No, Crimson Vow.
Yeah.
It was the Crimson Vow one that was very interesting, but um, it's sometimes a bit too niche, and 6 mana is a lot to invest for a
Hmm.
wipe.
Yeah, it's definitely not a standard player because of the restriction, but I would not be surprised to see this show up more in like modern eventually.
Yeah.
It would definitely be showing up if Luris didn't get the ban hammer because that 2 or less is...
They both coexisted for a decent amount of time. The more important factor behind it is actually, I think, the fact that you have to have it in your sideboard, and the decks that would play it, in the sense of Esper Control, weren't a they didn't have any meta share during that time, and no one was
Mhm.
playing Esper, and so the card basically saw no play.
Yeah, but also in modern, there's just a better version, and that's Damn.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Modern Horizons 2, what are you doing?
Yeah.
All right, and to close out this deck tech here, we've got Maze Mind Tome. So this is kind of how we're going to answer the Thoughtseize decks, the kind of slower grinding decks, the ones that are interacting with our hand more often than not. This kind of keeps the game going whenever it's at a slower pace. We get to grind, put page counters on here to draw a card, or we can scry to filter our hand. Also, not to be ignored is the gain 4 life. A lot of times we can set up board positions, especially with our Boreal Grazer, to get to that extra leg of the game against burn, or the mono green decks also can get a little crippled by that extra 4 life. So this is kind of a card that we bring in to grind a little bit more, make sure we get to turns 4, turns 5, turns 6, so that we have the mana to eventually execute our game plan. But yeah, this is the combo deck that I'm looking at the format from, that is kind of a little off the beaten path. Some people might say Winota is kind of a combo deck, but I think this is kind of a little more exemplary of what a true combo deck shows.
Well, Winota's, I would say it's more of a value synergy package. You could technically say it can go off in one turn, but the more important part about Winota is the fact that it's a very synergistic based deck that plays around one key card, that can win very easily because of Winota. I mean, it is a extremely powerful card, and as I saw someone say online, it was, it's a card, it's good with humans and non-humans, which, looking at the creature pool, I found that all creatures kind of fell under the creature pool of humans and non-humans. So the problem with Winota is a bit that you can basically print any card. I mean, there are bad creatures. There's, in order to have something be good, other stuff has to be bad. But the fact is, the more good stuff gets printed out, the more it can be slotted into Winota, which reminds me of a card in Modern that got banned called Birthing Pod.
Mm-hmm.
And because you were able to abuse good Enter the Battlefield effects with Birthing Pod, it eventually had to hit the ban hammer, because no matter what happened, the deck never got worse, because if creatures with bad ETBs came into the format, you just didn't play them.
Mm-hmm.
If good creatures came in, you took the bad ones out of your deck, put in the good new ones. So Winota is definitely one of those decks that is scarily climbing without falling back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Winota is another one that's joining that list of possible future bans. That's fact, as you said, it's not ever going to get worse. The bigger the pool gets, the more cards are going to be there. The more different ETB effects are going to. Basically, you're just going to have more to choose from.
Mm-hmm. And I like the 3 decks that we've chosen today, because each of them have their own little angle that is kind of attacking the Winota deck. I mean, the Rogue's Dimir deck applies the pressure early while making sure that it still has the interaction. So developing that impressive clock, puts the Winota player on the back foot, and they often aren't able to establish the board position they need to get through your board and take full advantage of Winota. And scratch your deck, I mean, come on, it's Esper Control. It's kind of been its lot in every format, is keeping the creature control or the creature tempo value deck in check.
I mean, the scary parts that those creature-based decks, which I may have not mentioned, is those creature-based decks. One scary card they all have is either Thalia or there's that one angel from Kaldheim, I forgot what her name was, which can kind of stacks you out of the game, which is a very scary aspect about those kind of decks. So it is definitely one of those matchups that you're trying to prepare for. They can have draws that sometimes are just unbeatable, which is sad that if that happens. It's just the fact that with Winota, you just have to be able to deal with her when she comes down. But the problem is, with a combo deck, sometimes like if you stop your opponent from casting a Grape Shot when they play Storm, can't win. If you kill, counter, whatever, you deal with Winota, you still have the entire rest of the deck that you have to deal with. Even if I just kind of just get rid of all 4 Winotas in the deck through some kind of like extraction effect, I am still not able to, I'm still having to deal with the rest of the deck. They're playing werewolves, they're playing big bad beefy chonkers. The 1/1s aren't the big issue with control. It's just the fact that as soon as someone drops down like, here's a 3/3, we add 2 more 2/2s here, here's another one, we add a 4/4 here, and you have to deal with all of them. So Winota is not one of those decks that is dead draw as soon as Winota doesn't get hit the battlefield, which is why it's so scary.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how these decks each have their own sort of game plan incorporated to the deck, because it is so dominant and powerful in the format. Speaks to Joe's point about it maybe potentially needing the hammer.
Yeah. I mean, Pod was also one of those decks that, even if you didn't draw the Pod, you still had the good creatures. So, I mean, I'm not saying like it needs... I think it realistically could get banned, but let's not have this be a ban discussion video.
Oh yeah, no, that's definitely...
talk about was Phoenix. Phoenix is also one of those decks that each one of us is trying to deal with in a certain way. I think the combo deck is just less trying to deal with the Phoenix, more trying to just be faster, which is, sometimes just be faster than your opponent is a viable strategy.
Yep, and that is definitely what this is trying to do in both of those matchups, the Winota and the Phoenix matchup. Just, if you have to, buy a turn, but generally, you can push through. You can get, and it just speaks to the underlying resource that is your life total. It's one of the hurdles that a lot of people find difficult to jump whenever they're jumping from kitchen table magic to FNMs. And from there forward is being able to use your life total in addition to all of the other resources that you have as a way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have won control games in the past where, I stay at 1 life, and no matter what happens, you just have enough counter spells and enough answers to your opponent's threats. They can't get the final damage in. Frustrates a lot of my opponents. I honestly think it's funny when they get a little bit mad about it. But it's they say it doesn't make a difference if you win at 1 or you win at 20. It's all about trying to get your game plan and strategically enact it through and get to the finish line, no matter at what level you are. Every deck has like a game plan, and if you go into a matchup without trying to find a way of winning, this is something that I was from the Everyday Eternals podcast when they were talking about how to lose less instead of changing the mentality from I want to win more. It's to change it to I want to lose less and find ways to not lose. One of them they said is if you enter a matchup without having a game plan of how I'm going to win, like if let's say you enter and I'm like, I don't like. Let's say if I were to enter against an aggro matchup, counter spells are early game very, very poor. So what happens is you want to try and get opening hands where there are, removal spells in it, board wipes, and other ways to deal with their early threats, because that is the thing. If I play against a control deck, I don't need my removal spells most of the time, unless they have like a 1919 Shark token from Shark Tycoon. I don't need that Fatal Push like 99% of the game. So having a game plan and trying to follow through on it allows you to more focus on the strengths of the deck without falling under the weaknesses of it.
Yeah, these are all really good ways we all feel to be attacking the Pioneer format for right now. These are at least how we're enjoying the format. You're definitely welcome to take these decks and see how you do with them. No guarantees. It's always Magic is an experience-based format. You just play the decks you enjoy. As long as you're having fun, you're winning.
I would like to say actually about the Ninja Rogues list. I picked up the list. I've changed it a little bit, but I did pick up the original list from Casual Jake. If you do get a chance, just do take a look on Twitter for him. Let him know that I've stolen his list and changed it. Please go ahead. I'm going to let him know as well. So, but yeah, so that's it.
Yeah, so we ended the last video with a little bit of interaction. We talked about what our favorite 2-mana card in Modern was. We each gave really good answers, and we wanted y'all to give us your answers and responses. We want to kind of do a similar thing today, but we've got a different question for you. We've got something that is controversial. A lot of people love talking this one over, especially since the advent of this brand new card type, the Planeswalker. So what we want is for y'all to let us know what your favorite Planeswalker is. JP, you got a favorite Planeswalker?
Over there. End of story. There's no better. Liliana of the Veil. Always gotta be.
Specifically of the Veil, huh?
Yep.
All right.
Straight away, not a question.
Letting your Boomer Jund flag fly. I love it.
Hell yeah.
What about you, Scratch? What you got for us? What's your favorite Planeswalker?
So if you would have asked me this question about like 3 months earlier, like before Neon Dynasty, I would have had a hard choice, choosing between my boy Jace, the Mind Sculptor, or my other boy Teferi, two of my absolute favorite hero of Dominaria, not Teferi Time Raveler. I hate Teferi Time Raveler. Let's be very specific. 5 mana good, 3 mana bad.
The fun Raveler.
It sucks the fun Raveler out of the game, but sucks the fun out of the game. The Neon Dynasty has changed it all. They added the new and flashy, the Wandering Emperor, and I cannot find another Planeswalker I love more than her. The fact that she has the ability to be flashed. I mean, I hate the main phase casting of spells anyways, and I mean, you give me the ability to cast a Planeswalker at instant speed, I cannot complain. So, goodbye main phase. Goodbye, and hello to my opponent's turn.
Well, you need to give us the actual name of the
I said the Wandering Emperor.
Oh, did you? Oh, okay, sorry. That shows how much you listen to you, Scratch, because you're just full of crap. But how about you, Anthony?
I don't have a specific individual card Planeswalker in mind, just because my favorite Planeswalker has existed for a millennia and has had so many incarnations that it's hard to nail down a favorite. So for this one, I have to go with Nicole Bolas. Bolas had been just a center point of the storyline of Magic the Gathering for so long that I find it really hard to find another favorite. You could go with Jace, but Bolas kind of made Jace look like a chump. Tezzeret was in servitude to Bolas. So, like, just the raw power level and existence in the storyline of Magic the Gathering, like, he is absolute favorite Planeswalker.
So, is
Yeah.
this a lore-based choice? Because I'm hoping to get answers on like gameplay-wise, but I guess somebody's a huge fan of the lore.
I couldn't pick a just gameplay wise one because it would just kind of be boring. I mean, Jace the Mind Sculptor is near and dear to my heart. My first real big. I don't want to say. All right, so my first real big favorite competitive deck was during the Splinter Twin era of Standard. Jace the Mind Sculptor, Stoneforge Mystic, Splinter Twin, that whole era. And we were just figuring out the top level of power for Planeswalkers at that point. So Jace the Mind Sculptor is close to my heart, but man, Bolus made him look like a chump.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to my memory wipe.
Yeah. Some interesting lore actually with regards to the Wandering Emperor. Isn't the Wandering Emperor supposed to be Elspeth?
No.
Is that what?
No.
Some-
The Wandering Emperor was supposed to be someone that you know nothing about, that just showed up here and there on planes, and no one knew why and what the point of their arrival was. And then in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty is the first time that you actually saw her face, actually. You know, like instead of just
Yeah, because War of the Spark was where we first saw her.
Yeah. There was heavy speculation that the
Yeah.
Wanderer was Elspeth, but it was never confirmed.
So it never. Okay, so it was never confirmed. All right, fair enough.
Yeah, I think actually Mark Rosewater came out and said that our original design for the Wanderer was supposed to be you, the player. And you were supposed to be the Wanderer coming onto this plane, interacting with these characters.
absolutely.
And then they were like, oh, well, now it's actually a character from Neon Dynasty.
Never heard of that.
And I felt like I could flash in everywhere and just, be the most powerful of them all. But no, I guess they just took that ability away from me.
I mean, when you're the emperor of a plane that used to be ruled by spirits,
Well, I guess we still have the spirits.
yeah, the kami are still floating around,
Yeah.
hanging out.
So,
But yeah, that's yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so of course, we want to hear your favourite Planeswalkers as well. So, do let us know. Send a tweet to us at snake underscore eyes underscore MTG. Do you know what? It's a little bit of a mouthful, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, it's on the screen there, right above Scratch, in case.
Saying it 3 times when you're drunk. Yeah, so do let us know. We really want to hear from you.
Yes.
Yeah, leave it in the comments below. Hit us with the hashtag SnakeEyesAsks on Twitter, Instagram, all of that jazz. Definitely let us know.
Yeah,
And of course, it goes without saying, please like and mash that subscribe button. We would love for you to join us.
Absolutely. We're going to be putting out content as much as we can, generally on a bi-week or bi-monthly status, but, yeah, not bi-weekly, bi-monthly. But we're busy folks. We've got lives outside of this, so, just hang out and hit that notification bell so that you do get alerted whenever we do put out some new content. But yeah, that's wraps us up for this episode. Scratch, JP, you guys got anything to add?
Yeah, I hope all you guys answer the Wandering Emperor, but yeah, I hope that everyone has been able to find some decks that they might enjoy, and I hope everyone has fun playing one of the a really good format within Magic.
All right, it sounds like we've got a nice little bow on this one. So yeah, folks, this has been Pioneering Modern. I'm Antog. This is Scratch and JP. Thanks for spending your time with us, and we will see you next time.
Take care.
Take care.